One thing that really struck me as I was doing the research for my book is the remarkable importance of Queen Sembian Mahadevi. Tamil temples had this unique architectural form. If you were to look at Deccan temples, for example, the walls are not flat. They're very rhythmic. They have recesses, they have niches, they have a lot of decoration on the walls. But Tamil temples generally have flat walls.
I want to ask you about the Cholas, the expansion of Cholas into other parts of the subcontinent.
Yeah, I think that it's a really remarkable period in the history of Tamil as a language, because one can really argue that it's under the Cholas that Tamil becomes an international language. So in northern Sri Lanka, in Trincomalee, which is on the coast, there was a Buddhist monastery. Now the Cholas were not Buddhists. The Buddhists accused the Cholas of destroying monasteries. This is in the Sri Lankan sources. But if you were to look at the inscriptions of the Buddhist monasteries in Trincomalee, they're written in Tamil. Atrocities it describes on the battlefield are bone chilling. There's a terrible massacre, and Jayangonda, the great Tamil poet, he minces no words in describing the horrors of the battlefield. So we're talking about oceans of blood, lakes of blood, people lying on the battlefield waiting to be eaten by dogs.
What are the naval traditions of India they wish to develop to kind of build that power?
I think that once again the Tamil merchants are a very big part of this answer.
I seem to be the history agent here, so I shall follow my karma. Tell me something. Let's start off with the chapter of your book. The title of your book, Who Are the Cholas? I've been a bit superfluous considering it's been in Tamil Nadu. But tell me about things which is not part of general knowledge about Cholas.
I'm tremendously excited to be here. Thank you, Kaveri. Thank you to the Union Express team for having me. I can't tell you what a thrill it is, having been working out of Delhi for the last 2 years, when I came into the hotel earlier today, to see a hall called Rajendra Chola Hall. It's not the kind of thing that I would ever see in North India. So it constantly amazes me how much how much of a role the Cholas continue to play in the Tamil public consciousness. And as Ravi said, it might be a little superfluous to ask me to tell you all something you don't know about the Cholas.
I said, tell them what we don't know.
But one thing that really struck me as I was doing the research for my book is the remarkable importance of Queen Sembian Mahadevi, who, as many of us may know, is the grand aunt of the famous Rajaraja Cholan. And I think Sembian Mahadevi is really one of the most remarkable figures, not just in Indian history, but in world history. Yet outside of Tamil Nadu, barely anybody knows her name. The famous Nataraja icon, which today is a symbol not just of Hinduism, but really of India at large. Nataraja was the favorite god of Sembian Mahadevi. And before Sembian Mahadevi becomes the Dowager Queen of the Cholas in the 970s, you very rarely see Nataraja represented in the temples of the Kaveri floodplain. So he was worshipped primarily in Thillai, present-day Chidambaram, but he was not very well known in the Kaveri. What Sembian Mahadevi does in her about decade and a half as the Dowager Queen of the Cholas is she builds 12 temples and makes gifts to many more, not just in the Chola kingdom, but outside the borders of the Chola core territory. And in all of her temples, she includes Nataraja very prominently on the southern side of the Vimana, facing in the same direction as he does in Thillai. And what this does is effectively crystallizes the iconography of the god. It disseminates his image to a very wide constituency of Nada assemblies, village assemblies, Brahmin assemblies, merchants most importantly. And we have this remarkable case, I think in Tirudai Marudur. Of course, that renovation does not survive, but we know from earlier records that there was a renovation that was being done by a merchant corporation, the Ainutravar, the 500. And they started the renovation, but stopped it in the middle because Sembian Mahadevi introduced this new style of building temples, including Nataraja, and then shoehorned in a Nataraja sculpture, just to show you how this image was becoming more and more popular. And it becomes such a pervasive part of Tamil religion, of Tamil culture, that over the course of the Chola period, over 3,000 Nataraja bronzes are commissioned. And these later get picked up by Western museum collectors in the 19th century. These get picked up by Western art critics like Rodin, the famous French sculptor, and also picked up by Indologists like Ananda Kumaraswamy. And it is because of all of these people that Nataraja ends up becoming the icon that he is. But it all starts with one Chola queen who is barely known outside of Tamil Nadu.
See, Hinduism is one of the most inclusive of religions. So, the empire of Cholas, which spread all the way to Java, Sumatra, Malaysia, the whole thing. So, you find many temples, religious relics there. So, was there an evangelic aspect to the Chola empire building, or was it purely a matter of personal conviction on part of Rajendra Chola?
That's an interesting question. Have for those of you who took the escalators up, there's this spectacular sketch just downstairs on the first floor, a multi-panel sketch called Chola Migrations, and I found this so fascinating because it shows you not just the ship that is taking people to a distant shore, but it's also showing entire families on the move. It's showing people who are taking goats and sheep and like planting bananas. And I think it's important to remember that when we are talking about medieval culture spreading, we're talking about the movement of people. Now, the archaeological evidence of the Tamil diaspora is extraordinary. There is no other medieval Indian diaspora that reached as far as the Tamils did, to the point where in the 13th century, and I talk about this in my book, on the East China Sea, in the Chinese port of Quanzhou, they commissioned a Tamil style Shiva temple. And you can see to this day, though the temple no longer survives, the fragments of it essentially show Shiva with a Chinese face. Or the Gajendra Moksha, but Gajendra standing on these scrolling, swirling Chinese clouds. It's really remarkable to see how globalized these people were. And there's evidence of these merchant settlements in Sumatra. So Sumatra is one of the islands of Indonesia. It's facing the coast of Malaysia, and on both shores of Sumatra, on the east shore and the west shore, we have evidence that Tamil merchants had settled. And when they settled, they built temples in the Tamil style with Tamil deities, and very often actually importing stone from Tamil Nadu across the seas to make sure it was built in the right materials. Now, I'm not convinced there was an evangelical aspect simply because these temples were clearly intended to fill a local purpose. They were intended for the community. It was a way for the community to tie itself together. And if you see on mainland India also, something similar was happening in that Tamil temples were community centers for the region. So, I'm not sure there's an evangelical aspect to it, but there's definitely a commercial aspect to it because the fact that these are merchant settlements and also what is being grown in Sumatra. In the highlands of Sumatra, in the forests, you get camphor. Now, camphor is not something that grows naturally in India. So, in Tamil temple inscriptions, when you see camphor being offered to the god, it is being imported by merchants from across the seas. And the really interesting thing is, the coast of Sumatra is very marshy, it's very dangerous. So, the merchants didn't want to go around the shore between their ports. They wanted to go into the highlands, so carry their goods from one side of the island to the other side of the island. And the reason we know this is because in the highlands of Sumatra, there is a culture called the Karo culture. So there are indigenous Sumatran people, and their language has 200 Tamil loanwords. And this obviously comes from centuries upon centuries of interaction with Tamil merchants, Tamil priests. So there's a commercial aspect, but not an evangelical one.
Okay, so there are the logic for an empire, that it's two. One is to take your culture and transplant it in other geographies, and to empower yourself economically. So I remember reading somewhere, there's one of the British bureaucrats saying, we didn't build an empire by being nice guys. So there is a certain amount of kind of force which is involved. So where did you do your research? Did you go to Indonesia and Sumatra? All the research was done from here.
So, a surprisingly honest admission from that British bureaucrat who you read, I must say. My fieldwork was primarily in South Karnataka and in the Kaveri floodplain. For Indonesia, I relied on archaeological reports and images of the excavation and the artifacts that were found. But yes, I think we must not shy away from the fact that pre-modern empires expanded by violence. If you have to look at the primary sources, if you look at the Chola inscriptions, very often kings provide a list of their conquests. And it's quite interesting because Tamil temples had this unique architectural form. If you have to look at Deccan temples, for example, the walls are not flat. They're very rhythmic. They have recesses, they have niches, they have a lot of decoration on the walls. But Tamil temples generally have flat walls. They're punctuated only by pillars. So this allows for a large open space where every inscription, every gift made to a temple is recorded. And the interesting thing about the Choras is that whenever they made a gift to a temple, they would first include a small eulogy describing the king's achievements. And usually, the main thing that the kings would talk about is their conquests. And because the records on the walls are so comprehensive, year by year, you can say, okay, this year the king was claiming these conquests in this temple, but the next year he's in a different temple and he's claiming these conquests. So you can trace out a very detailed map of the activities, and you can see how warfare is almost a seasonal activity. So during the monsoon season, no war is happening, no marching is happening. Then after that you have a planting season where the fields are all prepared, and once the crops have been left to grow, then all the young men get together under the leadership of the king, and then they go to war. And then once that is over, once the campaigning season is over, they come back in time for the harvest. So it's very interesting that you can read the rhythms. This almost like a tide, this expansion and contraction of the empire and of warfare, season by season, year by year.
You know, my ignorance of the Cholas basically because of Kaveri you put me here. But I want to ask you about the Cholas, the expansion of Cholas into other parts of the subcontinent. Was there, when there is an imperial expansion, there also, along with it comes an entire bureaucracy of educators, entire bureaucracy of kind of culturals, linguists, all of them. So and Tamil is one of the most ancient cultures in the world, one of the most sophisticated languages in the world. I mean, forget about the phonemics. I mean, it's really a lot of spiritual depth, a lot of cultural depth. So was the influence of Tamil spread in the subcontinent by the Cholas?
Yeah, I think that it's a really remarkable period in the history of Tamil as a language, because one can really argue that it's under the Cholas that Tamil becomes an international language, because it is spoken in courts in South Karnataka, it is spoken in northern Lanka, and also we know that embassies came from as far away as Cambodia and even China to the Chola court. So Tamil must have been used as a language of diplomacy. It would not have been ridiculous to expect that Tamil would have been heard in Angkor, for example. And given how far the diaspora expanded, I think it very much supports the argument. But this also brings us to something very interesting, which is I was quite intrigued by how the Cholas managed this very diverse empire. If you were to look at the structure of all other empires before the Cholas, so if you look at the Chalukya and Rashtrakuta empires that I wrote about in my first book, Lords of the Deccan, what happens with most Indian kings is they will go beat up their enemies, they will force them to pay some tribute, they will appoint some puppet to rule in their name from the local dynasty, and then they'll go back. What the Cholas do is very different. They will kick out the local dynasty and they put a prince of their family, and they encourage Tamil merchants to migrate and intermingle with the local culture. So this allows the logistical reach of the empire to spread. Because you have the logistical ability to maintain that connection to your homeland, the Cholas are able to create a truly trans-regional empire, which was very new in South India at the time. It is also the first empire that actually united a big chunk of India's coast. All the major empires before that, if you think of the Rashtrakutas, if you think of the Guptas, the Mauryas, these are all empires of the Gangetic plains or of the Krishna Godavari river valley. The Cholas are a coastal empire. It's a very different kind of polity. In South Karnataka, once again, you see that this intuitive understanding of the temple, both as a religious space and a political space, I think it's a distinctively Tamil concept, arises in South Karnataka after Rajaraja Chola's conquest. So in Kolar, which is about an hour away really from Bangalore, there's this beautiful little temple called the Kolarama temple. Now, the Kolarama temple was a small temple, was a mud and brick shrine to the local goddess, and Rajendra Chola has it reconstructed in stone in the Tamil style. So instead of having the local Karnataka style rhythmic architecture, you have the flat walls, and you have these beautiful inscriptions written not just in Tamil but also in Kannada. So there's a very clear idea that both the local Tamils who have migrated and the existing Kannada population have to cooperate and coordinate in the worship of the goddess under the aegis of a Chola officer. And I think that this understanding of diversity, but also the ability to coexist with it, once again is a distinctive feature of Chola statecraft.
So of late, history. There's a group of young historians who are trying to liberate history from the strict academic rigors. I would kind of put cages of stories into which history had been put in, which made it very difficult to read by road. So a lot of young historians now who are challenging or trying to liberate that kind of history. And as far as the Indian within the subcontinental post-Islamic, invasion post-Islamic, it has had an ideological, connotations. Did the Chola expeditions into outside India, were there any ideological, nuances to that? Were there any ideological nuances?
Well, I think there's the ideology of conquest, of course, which animated most pre modern states. It animated ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Of course, Indians were no exception. But to your broader point, Ravi, about the writing of Indian history, I think my distinguished co panelists have also pointed out the same fact. I think that the tendency in India is to always subordinate history to one or the other political ideology. And I find that to be a very unjust way of dealing with our past, because it means we're constantly seesawing between accepting some facts, rejecting others, then accepting these facts and rejecting the others. I think that we have to have a more mature and systematic appreciation of the past, in that not all of what we think about the past is going to confirm our ideas and our biases, but the
No,
reality of
we're
it is
talking about the
always.
Cholas. We're not talking about.
Of
I'm
course,
talking
but
about
I'm
the
talking
Chola.
also about the Cholas, because, like many other, like I would say, all pre-modern dynasties, I think, have fed into various nationalist ideas in various states. So I come from Andhra Pradesh, that's where I was born, and the medieval dynasty of the region were the Vengi Chalukyas.
Yeah, no,
Now,
what I'm meaning is that, for example, when the Christian empires expanded,
yeah,
and destroyed the Byzantines, all those guys, they had brought in they had brought in a concept of Christianity, and they spread Christianity. Similarly, when the Muslim empire, invaders came to India and other places, they, completely took over the local people and changed their religion, converted them. But Chola does not seem to have done that. I mean, he might have built Hindu temples. He might. So what differentiates Chola from the other invaders who, or intruders who created empires? What are the
so
lasting cultural legacy?
I think that the distinguishing feature, generally speaking, of the way that Indian empires expanded is that they're very comfortable with diversity. So, as I was saying earlier, in South Karnataka, they are rebuilding the temple and they're continuing to use Tamil as well as the local language. Now, you see something similar happening in Sri Lanka as well. So, in northern Sri Lanka, in Trincomalee, which is on the coast, there was a Buddhist monastery. Now, the Cholas were not Buddhists. The Buddhists accused the Cholas of destroying monasteries. This is in the Sri Lankan sources. But if you were to look at the inscriptions of the Buddhist monasteries in Trincomalee, they're written in Tamil. And before they were written in Sinhala, after the Cholas, they're written in Tamil. So clearly, there is a multilingualism that is there in this part of India. There is a comfort with diversity. And so when conquest happens, instead of a replacement of a previous culture, you have a new layer added on to what was there already before. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I think it does. The other conquests, whether the Roman Pope's armies or the Crusades or the Islamic Arab invasions of the subcontinent and India, there's a lot of cruelty involved in it. There are people being burnt at the stake, beheaded, or Sikh gurus put on, I don't know, whatever, chapati turns or whatever. But and if you look at the scriptural, I mean, text evidence available at that period, there doesn't seem to be any horror stories the Cholas seem to have perpetrated in their,
No,
imperialism.
I'm sorry, I have to correct you there. I was very disturbed when I read the Kalingatta Bharani, which is produced in the 12th century in the court of Kulothunga Chola, who's one of the later kings, and the atrocities it describes on the battlefield are bone chilling. It's the way the story unfolds is of course a little amusing because it's told from the perspective of the ghouls who live in Kali's court, the goddess Kali, and they're all starving because the Cholas have not fought any enemies for 10 to 20 years. And then after Kulothunga Chola orders the conquest of Kalinga, there's a terrible massacre, and Jayangonda, the great Tamil poet, he minces no words in describing the horrors of the battlefield. So we're talking about oceans of blood, lakes of blood, people lying on the battlefield waiting to be eaten by dogs. No, let me finish. I think it's important for us to remember that conquest is conquest. War is war. Destruction is destruction. Who is performing this? At the
No,
end of the day,
I'm
people
not,
are still dying.
I'm not talking about battlefield. Wars are always violent. I'm talking about the other invasions went beyond the battlefield. It went beyond kind of inquisitions in Goa. It went beyond kind of torture of no. I mean, what Vikram had written in his in the book on Tipu. The horror was visited on the populations to change their kind of cultural gestalt and make it into outsiders kind of. That's what I'm asking. Did the Cholas perpetrate horrors on the local populations?
So I don't think it was a matter of royal policy. I don't think, especially when if you want to rule a territory, you are not going to be massacring everyone because you want them to be your subjects.
But
At
the
the end
others
of the
did,
day.
no?
Well, I do see the primary sources that say this, but I want to see an expansion of the archaeological evidence. As I said, when I was talking about the destruction of Anuradhapura, which is something the Cholas claim, the Sri Lankans also accuse the Cholas of destroying Anuradhapura, but the archaeology shows that nobody destroyed Anuradhapura; it was abandoned. So there might be. It's very important for us to understand that primary sources because they are written like by people like you and I. Ultimately, these people have a story they are trying to tell their audiences. Now, to what extent was that true? To what extent were these political claims being made? Is difficult for us to be
No, not
100% sure.
political. I was just purely trying to kind of examine the difference, the civilizational difference. I'm talking from a civilizational point of view, whether how the Cholas, it seems to be they were far more evolved and civilized culture than many of the others who came into the subcontinent.
I think
Number,
Ravi, I'll have to disagree with you there. Please look at the Chola primary sources and see. Again, I
no,
don't understand. I
population. I'm
don't.
talking about local populations. That is where it actually matters.
Yes,
I
and
mean, where the massacres, people of Indonesia massacred, where they turned into Shaivite worshippers, where they kind of, they're whatever the Buddhist stupas destroyed to kind
if
of,
you look
put
at the
temples.
inscriptions of Rajadi Raja Chola, he similarly claims that he attacked Jain Basidis in South Karnataka. This is what he claims. And the Chalukyas also accuse him of doing the same thing. Now, did this actually happen? Difficult to be sure. What we can say is that South Karnataka used to be a great bastion of Jainism. This is what all the temples shows, this is what all the archaeology shows that. But was it necessarily the Cholas who were responsible for this, or
Or
was
maybe
it?
Ashoka was. That's also
It could have
possible. But,
exactly. So
well,
we don't have a decisive answer to
my
this.
last question is that, the Cholas were a very powerful naval power. What are the naval traditions of India they which they developed to kind of build that power?
I think that once again the Tamil merchants are a very big part of this answer. If you look at the inscriptions of Nagapattinam, you know that many merchant corporations lived there. And we have a lot of interesting details about the ships that were being built by these people in various surviving manuscripts that are found in the Maldives by B. Arunachalam, who was a maritime history professor in Mumbai. And it is really amazing because I found to my great surprise that the North Star was not visible from South India in the 11th century. So they instead used to navigate using the Big Dipper. And they had such exact measurements of the altitude of stars that it was simply using their fingers or this interesting little, like a rudimentary astrolabe. So they would know that, okay, so the position of such and such port corresponds to this angle of this star. So
Yes, the South
simply,
Indians are much smarter. That's about it. Any questions? I think she's already kind of making faces at me. Any questions for? No. Okay. Very disappointing.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Very, very.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you. Thank you to the audience.
Great, great discussion.